Hi everyone. Welcome back to another intense chapter. No voiceovers, no dialogues, just silence, choices, and the weight behind them. Tonight's story isn't about a simple struggle. It's about trust, betrayal, and the invisible hands that tried to control fate. Watch closely. Every glance, every step could be a clue or a trap. The morning was quiet. A thin veil of mist still lingering over the water, as Tu Tieu waded alone into the flooded patch of water spinach. Each decisive cut to the root felt as if she were severing the heavy weight of hardships pressed deep in her chest. Cold water slid across her calloused hands, the raw scent of green stems mixing with the breath of labor. One by one, fresh bundles of morning harvest gathered at the bank, reflected in her weary eyes as fragments of hope, small earnings to carry her through another day. She rinsed each bundle carefully, stripping away the coarse leaves, tying them into neat, modest bunches. Her fingers trembled, not merely from fatigue, but from the quiet loneliness seeping into her, surrounded only by the rippling of water and her own shallow breath. At last, the basket was full, its weight pressing down on her shoulders, yet warmed by the fragile promise of survival. The village market appeared alive before her, crowded but familiar. Woven mats of produce, the rustic smiles of neighbors, all blending into a humble chorus of everyday life. Tu Tieu laid down her water spinach, its green tips glistening under the season's rain as if calling to passers-by. Feet paused, eyes lingered, hands reached, and coins exchanged, turning the toil of the morning into tangible value. For a fleeting moment, the burden felt lighter. Then, amid the simple trade and the unhurried rhythm of the marketplace, a stranger emerged. His presence broke the cycle of routine. He bought everything she had gathered. In that ordinary act, something began. A quiet shift, the first note of a hidden turn fate had prepared for her, though she did not yet see it coming. Late in the afternoon, as the marketplace thinned out, Tu Tieu carefully gathered the few bundles of greens left. The last rays of the sun fell across her sweat-dampened hair, framing a portrait of exhaustion bound with resilience. It was then that the stranger appeared again. He stepped closer, his smile courteous, yet his eyes carried a subtle glint. Something unreadable, something withheld. In his hand was a small pouch, which he set before her. Inside lay an amount of money that made her chest tighten. But in return, he offered nothing more than a simple gesture. A vague request, unspoken, unexplained. No reasons given, no words to ground trust, only a silent expectation pressing upon her in that fragile moment. Tu Tieu hesitated, her gaze falling to her clenched hands. Years of hardship had taught her caution, had carved suspicion into her bones. Yet the weight of her own struggles trembled against that instinct, bending it. Around her the sounds of the market faded. Evening shadows stretched long across the ground, as if time itself urged her toward a choice. At last she nodded, subtle, hesitant, not so much agreeing with him, but surrendering to fate's insistence. The man turned and left, his figure dissolving into the current of people melting into dusk. Tu Tieu remained, the pouch still clutched tightly, unease stirring within her. The request was undefined, shapeless, yet it had already planted something inside her heart, a seed of suspicion. And, like all seeds, it would grow, drawing her step by step into a trial she could not yet foresee. Night had fallen. The street lay quiet, lit only by the faint glow of weary street lamps, their light spilling across cracked sidewalks. Tu Tieu sat hunched beside her half-abandoned basket of vegetables, clutching the small pouch tight. Suddenly, a shadow emerged, pausing directly in front of her. The dim light revealed a gaunt face, deep eyes carrying truths too heavy for words. It was Alan, the man who had once appeared fleetingly in her fractured memories, the one she had pulled back from the edge of death, blood pooling beneath him on cold stone. This time, there was no courteous smile, only the weight of secrets pressing through his silence. Alan sat down slowly, his gaze laden with confession. His trembling hand gestured toward the pouch in her grasp, then touched the faint scar across his chest. In that moment, clarity struck Tu Tieu. The money was no accident. The vague request was not so simple. Somehow, Alan had left a piece of his fate bound to her hands. Her heart twisted, caught between sympathy and suspicion, pulled apart by the gravity of what she did not yet fully understand. The wind stirred down the narrow alley, carrying a chill that seemed to lengthen the silence into a mournful song. Alan lowered his head, as though finally acknowledging a guilt long hidden, before rising and walking away. Tu Tieu remained still, her eyes following his figure as it dissolved into the shadows. Within her, the truth that had just surfaced cut like an invisible blade, carving open a path of trials ahead, one that would demand choices she could never undo. The next morning, Uri stood still inside the wide room, where sunlight slipped through thin curtains, scattering faint streaks across the floor. His gaze drifted outward, yet his thoughts were bound tightly to the image of Alan near Tu Tieu the night before. A quiet unease stirred within him, like an undercurrent rushing beneath ground that appeared calm. He moved slowly toward his desk, flipping open files one by one, yet the words before him blurred into nothingness. Memories returned, the odd gestures of Mrs. Lan, her secretive meetings, and now Alan's sudden presence. Each fragment wove together into a canvas half in light, half in shadow. Uri no longer knew where to place his trust, even among those closest to him. His hands gripped the desk's edge, veins drawn sharp as turmoil surged inside. One part of him longed to protect Tu Tieu, shielding her from every hidden danger. Yet another part whispered fear, that this closeness, instead of safety, might drag her deeper into a labyrinth of unseen threats. The morning light angled across the room, casting his shadow long upon the wall, a figure split between faith and suspicion. Uri closed his eyes, surrendering to the silence that pressed in around him. In that breathless stillness, he realized the road ahead would no longer be shaped by love and sacrifice alone. It would be a confrontation with secrets too long unnamed, shadows that demanded to be faced. The afternoon drifted through the quiet room, pale light spilling through dusty window panes, casting scattered streaks of gold across the wooden floor. Mrs. Lan sat across from Tu Tieu, hands trembling on the table, unable to meet her gaze. The room felt heavy, every breath pressing down into the space, leaving only silence and anticipation. She began recounting the truth, what she had done to Alan when he was unconscious, the money and gold she had taken, the promises broken. Tu Tieu listened, her heart constricted, each beat echoing loudly in the stillness. Disappointment, anger, and pity intertwined, weaving through every thought, pressing against the walls of her mind. Each word Mrs. Lan spoke was like an invisible blade, cutting into trust yet opening a door to forgiveness if she chose. Tu Tieu pictured Alan, the man once saved, and a sense of responsibility stirred within her. She realized that this revelation did more than clarify the mysteries before her. It offered a chance to cleanse the shadows lingering from the past. As the confession concluded, Mrs. Lan lowered her head, depleted of strength, consumed only by remorse that time could not erase. Tu Tieu remained seated, observing her, feeling both the weight of the moment and a quiet relief. The truth lay bare, and though the path ahead promised challenges, it was now illuminated with clarity. What had been hidden was revealed, and the future, while uncertain, now had a direction forged by understanding and confrontation with reality. Late afternoon sunlight fell across the small stream where Tu Tieu stood, the remains of an old, collapsed bridge casting shadows over the water. Viat appeared, Uri's longtime friend, calm in demeanor, yet eyes gleaming with determination. He spoke little, instead diving into the task. Each cut of the saw, each wooden plank placed precisely, composing a silent story of dedication. Tu Tieu watched, her heart quickening as the bridge took shape, solid and dependable. Every beam, every joint carried the care of someone committed not merely to the task, but to the trust he held for Uri and for Tu Tieu herself. In that quiet moment, his presence became a support, soothing the undercurrent of anxiety stirred by the schemes lurking around them. When her hands touched the completed bridge, warmth spread through her, a mix of relief and gratitude. The surrounding world remained hushed, only the rustling of leaves in the wind and the reflection of the setting sun on the water composing a serene, reflective tableau. The bridge became more than a connection between two banks. It was a link between hearts. Tu Tieu felt the invisible threads tying her to Viat, to Uri, to past struggles and present efforts. A new hope kindled within her. Though challenges lay ahead, there were hands willing to help, and she was no longer alone on the road she had to walk. The sun dipped lower, elongating shadows, and yet the bridge stood, a testament to quiet resilience, trust, and the small acts that weave safety and friendship into the fragile fabric of life. The sunset fell across the construction site, the red light reflecting off the newly completed roof. Uri stood beside Tu Tieu, his eyes gleaming with determination, yet burdened with concern. She remained still, feeling each of his breaths, sensing the tension mixed with a trust that together they could overcome any danger. The atmosphere thickened around them, the usual noises of the site fading, leaving only the whistling wind through the steel frames. Uri and Tu Tieu exchanged a glance, a silent message of vigilance and resolve. They knew Mr. Tuan was plotting, and every step they took next had to be measured, calculated carefully to avoid falling into his trap. Tu Tieu felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her, yet beside Uri she was no longer alone. All the fears and doubts of the past softened under his steadfast presence. She subtly squeezed his hand, drawing strength from him to confront the impending threat. As the sunset disappeared, replaced by the gray hues of night, darkness enveloped the site. In that shadow, Uri and Tu Tieu stood like solitary yet resolute figures, ready to face a conspiracy long hidden. Their vigilance, courage, and mutual trust became the only shield against the dangers ahead. This was not just a confrontation with an enemy. It was a turning point affirming their bond, loyalty, and mental strength. The wind carried the chill of uncertainty, yet they stood firm, two forces united against deception and malice. Every shadow seemed alive with potential threats, every silent corner a possible ambush. Yet, in each other's presence, they found clarity. Together, they braced for the challenge, prepared not only to survive, but to protect what mattered most: their lives, their truth, and the fragile threads of trust that tied them together. The night wrapped around the construction site, streetlights casting long shadows across the steel frames. Uri and Tu Tieu stood side by side, their silhouettes stretched across the cold concrete. A sudden breeze swept through, carrying the metallic scent of danger still lurking unseen. In their eyes, trust and suspicion collided, their hearts pounding against the silence. Above them, the night sky concealed secrets, as if every dark corner waited to reveal a hidden trap. They both knew. One wrong step could draw them deeper into the web of schemes. Yet together, they stood firm, unyielding. The newly built bridge shimmered faintly under the light, a fragile symbol of hope, of a bond forged in struggle. But in that stillness, a question lingered like a shadow. Would Uri and Tu Tieu find the strength to overcome what lies ahead? Or would the darkness strike once more, testing them beyond their limits?